I'm pleased to announce that we have two very distinguished economists joining us together on a panel together, Arthur Laffer and Steve Hanke. Art Laffer is the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates, former member of President Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board. He also advised Trump's 2016 campaign. Laffer is a former professor at the University of Chicago, University of Southern California, and Pepperdine University. He's especially known for the Laffer curve, which shows the relationship between taxes and tax revenue. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2019. Steve Hanke is a professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University and was a senior economist in Ronald Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors. Professor Hanke is a world-renowned expert on currency reform and has advised heads of state in Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. He's also had extensive experience as a currency and commodity trader, having worked in senior roles at Friedberg Mercantile Group, Toronto Trust Argentina, and Advanced Metallurgical Group, among others. Welcome, gentlemen, Professor Hanke and Dr. Laffer. An honor to host you both.
Well, thanks for having us. Great to be with Art.
With you, Steve, it's a pleasure always.
I understand you're old friends and you've been acquainted for many, many years.
We're old and we're friends. That's true.
Yeah.
I didn't mean it that way. You've known each other for a long time.
No, you're not.
How old are you, Steve? How old are you, Steve?
I'm 81. How old are you?
Okay, you're a kid. I'm 83. So,
okay.
David, we're ready to go. We're rock and roll.
As long as we can still throw a punch and take a punch, that's all that counts.
That's it. Yeah.
We're gonna talk about economic outlook, monetary policy, taxes. First off, is there anything you don't agree with? I mean, not that we're going to focus on that.
There are lots of areas where Steve and I don't agree with, but we do agree with the perceptions, the focus, and the importance of the areas that we talk about. Monetary policy, I would guess that Steve and I would guess we have slight disagreements there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a real big fan of Volcker. You're probably not so much so, Steve, I'd guess.
No, I'm a fan of Volcker. He finally decided to keep his eye on the money supply and slow it down and kill inflation. So I don't have any problem with that. There are probably nuances in here where the disagreement, shall we say, are kind of out in the weeds, professional kind of small things. But the main thing is you have to look at Art's 5 pillars of prosperity. And Art's 5 pillars of prosperity, I completely agree with. Light taxes, small government, stable monetary, smart, light regulation, and free trade.
That's it.
Those are the 5 pillars of prosperity. Now those are Art Laffer's, but actually, what is that? That's what we used to call Reaganomics. That's all. Reagan's program was the 5 pillars, and it works, and we can use those 5 pillars to focus on what's going on in today's world and where we're going just by looking at those 5. Everybody can remember them: taxes, small government, stable money, smart, light regulation, free trade. How about free trade? We're going in, we just had President Biden piling on the tariffs that Trump had unfortunately put on. Trump got off on the wrong foot. He's been advised by Bob Lighthizer, who's a big protectionist and anti-free trade. And Biden has just doubled down. We have now 100% tariff on EVs coming in, very high tariffs on solar panels, all kinds of green stuff coming from China.
Yeah. Now, we would have a slight disagreement here, Steve, just on interpretation. I had a long conversation with the president in 2017, and his comments to me were very much this way.
You're talking about President Trump.
Oh, yes, of course. That's the only one I consider the president. I mean, hell, Biden's 3 years younger than I am, but I resemble some of those things of Biden. But frankly, he's not someone I think of as a president at all. But Trump was saying the only reason he threatens tariffs and he imposed them is to get these people to the negotiation table so he can do free trade agreements. And if you look at what his behavior was, especially, I'll just use one example. When he was on his way to meet with Kim Jong-un in Singapore, and he was at the G7 in Ottawa. He had to leave a little bit early, and he apologized to the other 6 members there. And he said, "Forgive me, I have to leave early, but I think you know what I'm doing, and I think this is really, really important for world peace. But I want to make a deal with you. I have just a few minutes left. The U.S. is prepared at present to get rid of all tariffs and all non-tariff barriers if all of you guys will too." And there was dead silence. There was dead silence in the room, and they all looked at their shoes. They whistled away. They looked at. I think Trump's all of his views on tariffs and threatening are words to bring people to negotiate a free trade agreement. These people, these mercantilists around the world, all they care about is access to the U.S. market. And Trump is a negotiator, and I believe a free trader all the way. That's me, Steve, from knowing him for many, many, many years. I really think this is his strategy to negotiate a free trade deal in the world, my view.
I actually I read a quote that you told the Financial Times back back couple weeks ago. You said Trump called me. He said I'm a free trader. You said yes. I assumed you're a free trader. Anyone who imports 2 foreign wives has to be a free trader. You said he
yes,
didn't
I did
appreciate
say
that.
I did say that to him, and he did not laugh. He did not laugh. Anyone who imports 2 foreign wives has to be a free trader. Duh. But no, he looked at me and just. So there you go. Sense of humor, maybe not, but you see where I'm coming from, Steve, on that issue.
Yeah.
Well,
he's a negotiator.
Number one, I hope, in fact, that that's the case. But my view is that I think he's been, from a practical point of view, highly influenced by Lighthizer, who couldn't be worse on this. Lighthizer is the biggest protectionist on the planet, almost.
Yes, he is, and you're totally right. And Peter Navarro, he used him as his sort of bulldog on a chain. Peter Navarro, please agree to the free trade agreement, or else I'll have to let loose of this chain and put Peter on. He is one who really knows how to negotiate. And he also, by the way, I mean, the president is really a CEO. He's he doesn't take a lot of disagreement easily and nicely. He fights back, but I don't know if anyone in the White House who really enjoyed working with him, because he is a CEO, and he's.
See, the one thing about free trade, and the big problem is that all the intellectual arguments about free trade, the advocates always win those intellectual arguments, but they lose the elections. So it's a matter of getting the people to understand the idea and the benefits of free trade. And I mean, the benefits of free trade are pretty clear. We become more competitive because of free trade. It's a way to enhance competition in the United States. If you look at the newspapers today, they're talking about we've got to become more competitive. We've got to become more competitive in the United States. The best formula for that is a lot more international trade and competition. In addition to that, the benefits of free trade, just for the average Joe, speaking of Joes, food is cheaper, clothes are cheaper, steel is cheaper, cars are cheaper, phone service is cheaper, everything is cheaper. And in addition to that, there probably is a lower probability of getting into a war if you've got
that's the whole Mundell model. Did you remember his speech when he got the Nobel Prize? What he said? He said it was the Smoot-Hawley tariff that caused the Great Depression, and it was the Great Depression that caused World War II. Direct link, exactly the way you said, Steve.
Absolutely. People don't realize that the Great Depression, the 1-2 punch was the Smoot-Hawley tariff. That most people don't realize this. And this comes into Art's bailiwick of supply side economics. Supply side economics, what is it? It's simple. It's all about incentives.
That's it.
And in fact, what is economics? Economics is all about incentives. It's all supply side economics, whatever you want to call it.
You just destroyed the whole Harvard economic faculty. I just thought I'd mention that.
Okay.
This is what President Biden just said. I'd like you to address this, please, and explain to the layman what effect tariffs will have on the economy. As you alluded to, President Biden just raised tariffs on Chinese electric
EVs.
vehicles, batteries, solar panels, cells, steel, and a host of other products. He said in a speech recently, American workers can outwork and outcompete anyone as long as the competition is fair, he said at the White House. But for too long, it hasn't been fair. For years, the Chinese government has poured state money into Chinese companies. It's not competition, it's cheating. Is he right then that protectionist measures will help American workers outcompete Chinese
I'll answer
companies?
first with a simple no. He's not right. It's acres and acres of soap suds and horse manure, what he just said. The best way to create competition and show American workers is to get rid of all tariff barriers, no matter what the hell the Chinese do. If they want to give us all their cars free of charge, why should we not want them to do that? Free trade from the U.S. standpoint is good for all the U.S. Steve, your turn.
Yeah, I fully agree. I would just add to that, kind of ironically, what President Biden is doing, he's copying the Chinese model of state capitalism. He has adopted state capitalism as a way to run and allocate capital in the United States. That was made clear back in 2021 when Brian Deese, who was the head honcho at the White House on economics, made a speech, and it's been followed up by Jake Sullivan making speeches about this, and Janet Yellen. So the U.S. is following the Chinese lead with state capitalism and interventionism and selected subsidies. Now that's the theory. That's at 30,000 feet. What does this mean in practice? We're going green. That's the mandate. We've got climate change. Everybody's on board with that. This will cost, on an international basis, $55 trillion between now and 2030 to meet these targets. And McKinsey has just done a study that has shown that 3/4 of that 55 trillion will never be able to be produced at a profit. So how is it going to be produced? It's going to be produced with subsidies. So we're on this subsidy gravy train thing, big time. It's green socialism that we're really getting into, because if you mandate green and you want to get there, the only way you can get there is by having huge subsidies to the private sector. So how's China come into this? How's the EV thing come into this? Well, Chinese, just if they're producing things that go green, they are solar panels and EVs, for example. They're way ahead of the United States, by the way, in the technology and everything. If they can do it, they're saving the Americans money. The EVs are going to be cheaper. Remember, I went down that list. Everything is cheaper if you have international trade. So what Biden has done with these tariffs, he's basically said this: we're going green. There's no such thing as a green free lunch, and you're going to pay the freight to go green. And what international trade would say is that, well, the ticket will not be as expensive to go green if you have international trade, and you can buy these green technologies at lower cost from foreigners rather than in the United States.
My suggestion to Biden would be you should use Kermit the Frog as his spokesperson if you like being green.
Okay.
You didn't like that joke. Okay, you don't like my jokes.
Well, that was a little bit heavy. It took me a while to sink in.
Well, it could have been the Jolly Green Giant. I could have said that one. There are a lot of them there, but remember the old adage on green: if it's not lettuce and it's green, don't eat it.
What's the larger geopolitical picture here? I mean, the Americans didn't ban Japanese cars, at least not, at least not eventually. They let in Toyotas and even the South Korean cars. Why are they banning Chinese cars now? It's the same.
Well, they're not banning them. They're just putting the tariff on. Reagan. Well, by the way, Reagan. Let's go back to Reagan a minute. Art and I, of course, advised Reagan, and Reagan was on the 5 pillars. But on international trade, unfortunately, some protectionist elements of the Republican Party got to Reagan, and he had kind of a mixed record on the whole thing. And one thing that they did, they put in quotas on Japanese cars, and this turned out. And Bill Niskanen, who was at the Council of Economic Advisors at that time, predicted this is going to happen. The Japanese said, "Okay, they say that's great. We'll cut a deal with you." It was a handshake kind of agreement, the quota thing, voluntary restraints, and the Japanese limited the number of cars that they sent to the United States, but they only sent in the expensive models of Toyotas and Lexuses and things like that, and that had very high profit margins. So it was a great deal for the Japanese. This is what happens when you get into these things, that you have all kinds of unintended consequences, David. The quotas, most people thought that put the screws to the Japanese back in the 80s. No, it was very profitable for the Japanese. They loved it.
The fuel efficiency standards were the ones that really did exactly what Steve's talking about. When they put in industry-wide fuel efficiency standards, it really did screw Chrysler in the lower end there and really made the upper end, just like you said, Steve, on the fuel efficiency standards.
Do tariffs, generally speaking, do tariffs cause inflation?
Tariffs cause, first and foremost, economic misallocation and poverty. Second, tariffs then cause higher prices for products that you import, and probably lower prices for products that you export, because they'll be prohibited to via Lerner's symmetry theorem. But on balance, they lead to higher prices overall and less efficiency and more poverty. Got it right, Steve?
Yeah,
did I pass?
I would say I just a little footnote on that. What you described, that higher prices for some of the imports, they change relative prices.
For some of the exports.
Some of the exports down, some of the imports up. Overall, they don't cause inflation. Changes in the money supply cause inflation.
There you go, Steve. Steve says it's right.
But the misallocation that Art's talking about is it's shifting the relative prices around between imports and exports.
It causes depressions.
Right.
And if you do it extremely enough, it'll cause the Great Depression, which is exactly what it did cause. And by the way, the 1970s, which Steve referred to earlier, on all the protectionism there under Nixon, the 10% import surcharge and all the other protectionist measures of the 1970s caused a very big decline in U.S. real output, employment, and production and productivity, exactly as Steve said.
See, and what happened in the 1970s, we remember we had stagflation then. So all the intervention and the tariffs and so forth caused productivity to go down, caused the economy to get weak. And the Fed then tried to goose things and increase the money supply excessively to get things moving. And that gave us the inflation part of the thing. So the tariffs give you the stag and the Fed gives you the inflation.
Right.
Gotcha. You got that, David?
Yes. Dr. Laffer, you also
underline that in red, by the way, just like George Jones did. Underline it in red.
I'll remember that for my next exam with Professor Hanke. Dr. Laffer, you said in an interview with the Financial Times, we need free trade, especially with Russia, especially with China, especially with Iran, especially with North Korea. How are we supposed to do that?
Just get rid of our sanctions on them, getting rid of our tariffs on those. Now, I also made it very clear in that interview that I'm not talking about exporting nuclear weapons to these countries. But as far as free trade goes, this is the only way of winning with these countries over to us, is having free trade, American business with them together, friends too, and therefore you don't have the war. It's the quote I did from Mundell on his Nobel laureate speech on that, but we need free trade with these countries to bring them back. We have had sanctions and prohibitions on trade with Cuba since 1959. You see how that's worked, David? I mean, it's really great. Now Cubans see U.S. free enterprise. My God, America, thank you for sanctioning us. Thank you for putting all these tariffs on us and all that sort of stuff, because now we see pro-growth, democratic, free market economic capitalism, and we understand the lesson. Now we love you more than anything, America. Not. Cuba is the perfect example of what happens when you take an enemy and don't do trade with them. You create a permanent enemy that hates you forever.
Exactly. And we can add to that list with, in addition to Cuba, how about North Korea? How about
I did,
Iran?
yeah.
How about Iraq? How about Venezuela? How about Russia? How about
Zimbabwe.
China? How about China now? Now
We
we
should
now
not have any protectionism against China at all. China,
absolutely not. And what happens if you look at the scholarly literature on sanctions, they don't work.
ever.
They actually create a rally around the flag effect of the people that are being sanctioned rally around the leaders that they have, and what they hate the people who are putting the sanctions on them. You make them mad. I mean,
You create enmity for less and forever.
It's totally counterproductive. But Washington, here's the way Washington works. Since 2021, we've had a 900% increase, David, in the number of sanctions. So it's their favorite weapon. And the problem with this is that the American public somehow has bought into this and thinks sanctions are bad. You sanction the bad guy, and that's supposedly good. But if you accept that, if you accept the sanctions kind of idea, and Art put his finger on it, that's just a form of protectionism.
Exactly.
Well, that's because politicians have told us that the alternative is war, outright war. We'd rather
Just
have
the reverse
sanctions.
is true. Just the reverse is true, David.
Yeah.
Just the reverse. Sanctions hurt you and them. And whenever you put on a sanction, you prohibit Americans from benefiting from foreign products coming in, and you prohibit their country from benefiting from U.S. exports to that country, and you make both countries worse off. And that is exactly the wrong model to follow.
Well, what then is the solution to deal with foreign hostilities?
If sanctions cause problems, David, the solution is to cut sanctions, cut tariffs, cut quotas, have more economic integration, learn what the other people are like, do business with them, become friends, and solve problems through the State Department, not through the Defense Department.
So North Korea tests some nuclear weapons. What is the appropriate U.S. response?
Wait a second. When you get to nuclear weapons, we have a Defense Department to handle that type of issue. But with regard to keeping them from getting nuclear weapons and wanting to use them and wanting to test them, that's where you have free trade in the State Department. But, no one argues. This is exactly the same thing with defense. The best form of defense spending, David, is always wasted. Whenever you find yourself in a situation where you're required to use your military hardware and prowess, that is a clear sign you did not spend enough. Spending on defense budgets is to prevent war, not to cause war. That is exactly why you have free trade. So you prevent war, you prevent poverty, you prevent worldwide inflation, is you have free trade that does it. And, free trade is so essential to creating economic prosperity and also eliminating the threats of war.
Professor Hanke, I think you had something to say.
No, I completely agree with what Art just said. To add a little bit of color to what Art said and confirm what he said, he said that sanctions impose big costs on those who are imposing the sanctions in the first place. So you look at Europe, what's happened to Europe? Russia this year is forecast to grow at 3.2% per year. Europe is going to almost grow at a little less than 1%. So the blowback, there's something called blowback associated with sanctions. And the blowback is what it does to you. Now, we've mentioned Bob Mundell, who was a good friend of both of ours, obviously. And Mundell put his finger on something he called the Afghan effect. And the Afghan effect is this. In 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. With Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski was the national security advisor. They put a ban on U.S. exports of agricultural products to the Soviet Union as a result of that incursion into Afghanistan. As a result of that, what happened? The Soviets went to Argentina immediately. They cut a deal, even a better deal than they were getting with the Americans. They got all the grain that they wanted. The American farmers were mad as hell about this because they couldn't export. Of course, Jimmy Carter, I think, lost the election because of that. And what about Argentina? Argentina had a huge boom. And who was in charge there? The junta. So the Afghan effect has all these unintended consequences. The American farmers get screwed. We basically are propping up and supporting a regime we don't like, a junta in Argentina, and the Soviets came off scot-free. They got grain.
And let me just add to what Steve said on the junta. It also caused war. It caused the invasion of the Falkland Islands by the junta in Argentina, which required Margaret Thatcher to come back down and take them back again. So, once you give these juntas their economic stuff through sanctions that we do, it causes war.
Okay.
How's that, Dave? Steve, how's that for a roundabout logic?
I love that. And
thank you. I made it up right on the spot.
Well,
I like to talk about taxes now, which is, I think, an issue that you mostly align with. Dr. Laffer, I'll start with you. It's been brought to my attention that some of the states with the highest taxes, New York, Connecticut, California, they're economically successful states that a lot of people want to move to. They also collectively contribute to more than 20% of the U.S.'s GDP, right? Is this a counter example of having to lower taxes? I mean, clearly they're poster childs of states with high taxes, but also are doing quite well.
What I would do, David, is this:
Yeah.
you take the 9 states that have no income tax, and you compare it to the 9 states with the highest income tax rates, and you look at the growth differentials there for the past 60 years, and the 9 states with no income tax. And by the way, if you go back in time, more and more of them become no tax. If you look at it, the zero income tax states literally kick the living poop out of all the high tax states in economic growth. Every state that has introduced an income tax since 1960 has underperformed relative to the rest of the nation. Every single one of those 11 states that have introduced an income tax has done it. There is no evidence whatsoever that raising taxes, income taxes, or property taxes in states adds to the economic growth of those states. Just the reverse is true. So any evidence that you brought here is either ill-conceived, ill-constructed, or ill-reported. And I know it's not ill-reported because you just reported it, David. So it's ill-conceived and ill-constructed and just plain wrong.
Okay. Professor Hanke, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I agree with Art. And some of the most recent evidence is that people are leaving those states those high tax states that you were giving a glowing review of, David. God, I don't know how you got off the reservation on that thing, but the people are leaving. California's losing population. New York's losing population. Maryland's losing population. And by the way, let's talk about something that I think is very interesting now. Taxes now, property taxes are soaring in the United States. If they do surveys and ask people what they're really sore about with regard to taxes, it's property taxes. And if we go back, let's go back and revisit something actually that Art was involved in, and that's Proposition 13 in California, 1978. Most people don't realize San Francisco was imploding then. It was collapsing. And a tax cap was put in Prop 13, capping property taxes at a 1% rate. And what happened? Within 4 years, the place was booming. San Francisco was booming, and the municipal revenue coming in was about 70% higher than it was before they put Prop 13 in. Home prices were going up, people were moving in, vibrant economy. Then in 1980, Massachusetts passed Prop 2.5. And Boston, people don't realize, Boston was imploding. It was going down the tubes. They put in the cap, and Boston went zooming up. Then Oregon in 1990 put a cap on. Portland turned around and started booming. Washington State did that in 1997, a cap. Seattle started booming. So if you put a cap in, and I think what we should do with this program, we should encourage people to start a tax revolt and a property tax cap. Baltimore, for example, I'm in Baltimore right now. Our property taxes are the highest in the state. The city's tax rate is about 2.25%, totally punishing. We've been losing population for ever since they put in 18 property tax increases in a row, and it killed the city. So this again, this is basic supply side economics 101 kind of stuff. We have a big tax problem in the United States right now. We have many tax problems. The biggest one is property taxes, and people are very agitated about it. So I think this is a ripe area for a great tax revolt like Prop 13.
I was just in Salt Lake City doing exactly this with the legislature 2 days ago, where we had a little bit over 50% of all the legislators there. You're right, Steve, 100% right.
Professor Hanke, you're right. We have a tax problem. We also have a deficit problem, which I know you've talked about several times in my show. So if you want to reduce taxes, then isn't the deficit going to get worse? How are we going to fix that problem?
Go, Steve.
Well, the first thing I do, remember the 5 pillars. One of them is contain government and small government. So you reduce government spending. That would be my first choice would be that.
Okay. I mean, is that, Dr. Laffer, is that possible today? Well, what are we going to cut?
Of course it's possible, but also I would say that in some of these areas where you've got these high tax rates, my home in Cleveland, where I was raised, was a very affluent neighborhood. My father was head of one of the largest companies in the country, and my home was beautiful, 7 bedrooms, built in the 20s, 4.5 acres, a swimming pool, all that. I checked with Zillow on what the price of that home is today, and its estimate is $375,000. My home here in Nashville, which is almost the same, built in the 1920s, a different style home, but I'm 2.5 acres, but I have a guest house. My home is worth $4.5 million here, according to Zillow. And the property taxes in Cleveland are a little bit over 3%. The property taxes here are about 0.6%, 0.6%. I am paying more in property taxes here at a much lower rate than they are in Cleveland, and I've had all the appreciation as well. So I'm going to argue with you that high property tax areas are also fiscally bankrupt. Memphis is the one big problem there. Detroit, downtown Detroit, has property tax rates of upwards of over 20%. 20% property. Look at Bridgeport and Hartford, Connecticut are the highest property. Both cities are bankrupt. By lowering property tax rates, I'm going to tell you that in due course, and it's not a long due course, you will be collecting more revenues, have less problems, and be fiscally more sound than you would be by raising property taxes. End of my
Exhibit number 1, Prop 13 in San Francisco. 4 years after they passed Prop 13, real inflation-adjusted revenues to the city of San Francisco were 70% higher than they were when they passed Prop 13.
You got that one, David? Underline that in red as well. Underline it in red. Steve Hanke, here it is. They were higher tax rate reductions, led to higher. And it wasn't just a little reduction in tax rates, David. We cut the average rate in California from 2.8% to 1% in one day, a 60% cut in the rate. And what Steve just said about property tax revenues is totally correct. Home prices in the 3 years prior to Prop 13 were about the same as they were in the nation. We were right in the middle. After a decade, property values in California were double the national average. The unemployment rate in California went from 2.6% above the national average to slightly below the national average. We created, in a 10-year period, we increased our size of California by a Massachusetts. We grew by a San Francisco per year, the fastest growing state in the nation. It is incredible what happens. But other than that, it was really awful. It was really awful. School, by the way, did better and everything else. So, end of the story. Underline what Steve says in red, David.
Okay. So far we've talked about protectionist measures, taxes. Besides those things, Dr. Laffer and Professor Hanke, what is really ailing the American economy? In other words, what do you think, in your opinion, is the biggest problem facing the American economy today, and the solution to that problem? Dr. Laffer, I'll let you go first.
Okay, I'll start. Just two things: medical transparency, knowing what prices are in hospitals, and knowing what the quality are, and having them posted so people can make good, rational decisions with good price information and good quality information is a huge, huge deal. It's 20% of U.S. GDP. It's really big. And the second one I would do on regulations that need to be changed is on energy. I think we should get rid of all these energy restrictions and all that stuff and allow people to produce energy free and clear and have pipelines and all of that. Those two, I think, are really big deals for the U.S.
Professor Hanke, what are your topics?
Well, I would go down the five pillars of prosperity, each one of them hitting on even monetary. What about monetary? Just stable money. We don't have stable money. We have the Federal Reserve. In February of 2021, the year-over-year growth in the money supply measured by M2 was 27%. That's the highest rate of increase we've ever had since the Fed was put in 1913. So we go zooming up, and now we've had since March of 2022, the money supply is actually contracted by 4.1%. So they've had us on a roller coaster. We haven't had stable money, we've had unstable money. And where should the stable be? If you're going to have a Fed and operating, they should be looking at the money supply, and they should be letting it grow at Hanke's golden growth rate of about 5 or 6% per year. And that would be consistent with hitting an inflation target of about 2%. And that's more or less, by the way, what Greenspan did in the 1990s. We had Bill Clinton as president. We had Newt Gingrich over as Speaker of the House. We had Greenspan in the Fed. We had him a huge peace dividend as the communism collapsed. We also had the benefit of all the Reaganomics, supply side economic stuff coming in on steroids by then. And we had terrific growth. And by the way, the combination of Clinton and Newt Gingrich, they were balancing the budget. The last 2 years of the Clinton administration, the second term, they actually were running surpluses, if you can believe it.
Just for the record, David, just for the record, I voted for Clinton twice, and God knows I didn't vote in that party's primary. I thought he was much better than Dole and much better than, much better than George Herbert Walker Bush. Ugh. Yuck.
What are your thoughts on what's currently going on today in Argentina with Javier Milei and his policies?
I was surprised. I was surprised, Steve, about your comments about Milei. I had a nice long conversation with Luis Caputo and about Argentina, and I'm disappointed that they have alienated you and Carlos and the others. It's just very disappointing.
What do you? By the way, what could you figure out what from Caputo what their game plan is? Do they actually have a game plan?
I was going to ask you that question, but
I don't know what it is. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, you know, what I had thought it was going to be, and obviously it's not, is the rehiring you for a currency block. But
yeah, I think they're just trying to do with their own variation on it, and basically an IMF kind of program, you know.
I hope that's not the case. I mean, you know, I read the article you sent me about Carlos's article and the quotes in there. I mean, Carlos, I don't remember him being a potty mouth like that before. And being a potty mouth like that does not help the cause at all. Right. It alienates people. It doesn't convince them. And so therefore, I was very disappointed in Carlos doing that. By the way, I have a big fossilized crab that Carlos gave me back there in the 1970s, 80s. Maybe, no, I guess it would be 90, wasn't it? The early 90s.
Yeah, must have been early 90s.
Yeah, but, you know, I was hoping Milei would become good. And the conversation I had with Luis, and that was about an hour, maybe an hour and a half long. So it was not a short one. I was not disappointed, to be honest with you. I came away hoping that there was a plan, there was a way of getting to something, but yours and Carlos's response, which I didn't read until after I'd had the interview, the discussion with him, really makes me very suspicious of them doing something.
That's my view. I don't think what they're doing is sustainable. That's the problem. And I really think, given Argentina, the currency problem is something they have to fix first, and then they go
exactly.
on.
No, everyone knows that.
It's
Everyone knows they have to fix the currency, the inflation situation. I sent them a paper I'd written back then, and I edited the paper up. But
you sent it, yeah. You sent it to me.
I did.
Good.
I sent it to
was
you.
good.
Yeah, well, but it showed what the stuff was that you did. I mean, you stopped the inflation.
The thing worked like a charm. Nothing was happening until we did the currency reform. We did the currency reform, and number one, step one, Menem was smart enough to bring Cavallo back. He was a foreign minister, and he made him economics minister. And then they did the currency reform within about a month after that, and the whole thing got going.
It did. And then, Pedro Poe and Rocky Fernandez are both students of mine back long ago over in the central bank. And it was what you put in there, the currency board. It just worked brilliantly, and inflation stopped. I mean, just bang. And then the prosperity occurred.
The thing people don't realize, once you do that shock with the currency reform, you get a confidence shock. Then people say, "Oh, Cavallo knows what the hell he's doing. Look, he killed inflation." And then they play ball.
Of course, what you did there. It started off as the currency. The inflation was the problem. They stopped it on the spot with the currency board, and the only problem with the currency board is that when you get a new administration that doesn't believe in it, all of a sudden they have a lot of hard foreign currency to spend and squander.
Oh yeah, that's when they abandoned the thing. Of course, they had a lot of reserves, and they pissed those away in a hurry.
Yeah. That's the problem.
There's one more topic I want to bring to your attention before we close off. This has been a fascinating discussion. Bitcoin. Okay, Dr. Laffer, you said on my show last year, about a year ago, you said that you're very excited about cryptocurrencies. I think Bitcoin is pretty cool. You said what you have is a limited supply of Bitcoin, and you have a currency that doesn't trace who owns it and uses it. Can you expand on this?
Sure. Just let me say, and this may be something where Steve and I do disagree. I don't think we will. We have had a very bad monetary policy for a long time, just as Steve recited there. I mean, a very bad, and people are looking for a private money, somehow that's limited in quantity, and Bitcoin, it may in part serve that purpose. We've had a decline in the U.S. dollar relative to goods and services over the last 4 years by 20%. The dollar is depreciated. Now, the dollar is appreciated versus other currencies, but that just tells us that we're the tallest midget in the bunch. I am looking at gold prices, and I'm looking at Bitcoin prices as being private alternatives to public monies. And if we can't get some sort of reasonable monetary stability, the way Steve has been able to do in Argentina, you're going to find the private sector trying to find an alternative money that does have stability. And that's what I think is happening with Bitcoin. We've got a long way to go, but I think Bitcoin is the market's response to a very untoward money and a bad money that's deflating versus goods and services. My story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, Professor Hanke.
So in principle, I agree. I would prefer private monies. As far as Bitcoin, getting into Bitcoin, I think it's a highly speculative asset that has a zero fundamental value. That's
well, so does gold have a zero fundamental value, doesn't it? I mean, so does paper currency have a zero fundamental value?
Since 1971, everyone has had zero fundamental value.
I mean, It was really done in 1913 was the real problem when we put in the central bank. But prior to 1913, we had private money, David, in the country. Now, it is true that the federal government defined a dollar as 1/20th of an ounce of gold and 1 ounce of silver. That's true. but they didn't control the money. That wasn't, these were all banknotes. It was all private money, and we had stability of prices for 2 centuries. And then we got the government into the goddamn game, and you can see what happened from 1913, then the devaluation of the dollar versus gold in 1933, the Bank Holiday Act. Then you go to 1972, where I was in the White House there and watched us destroy the dollar even further. And you see all of this happening. And, we need to move back to a private money. And I'm not sure that Bitcoin is the right story, Steve. I do agree with you. I'm not. But Bitcoin so far in the marketplace has done a pretty amazing job. And I don't see it anything having any less fundamental value than, let's say, gold or anything like that. But I may well be wrong on Bitcoin, but I am right on we need a private money.
Yeah. Okay. We're in agreement on that as a matter of principle. As a matter of practice, the dollar is in fact the best dirty shirt in town.
Of currencies.
Yeah, of currencies. Yeah.
Yeah, but not of goods. I mean, the dollar has really just gotten dirtier and dirtier and dirtier recently vis-a-vis goods and services. And that's the real problem. All currencies suck, and some of them suck worse than others. And that's the dollar sucks, but it's just not as bad as some of those other ones.
Now, Art is an old currency trader. There's an adage: buy dollars, wear diamonds.
There you go. There you go. Good work. Good work. That's so true. And now diamonds have this fundamental value, I believe, Dave, Steve, don't they? I mean, diamonds are just naturally worth something. You can feed millions of people with diamonds. I mean, they have this intrinsic value. Not the reason you like diamonds, the reason you like gold, the reason we all do is because it's limited in quantity. And that's what you want to have happen to your money, is you want it limited in quantity to stabilize inflation. That's why gold standard works so well for 2 centuries. I am hoping that if I doubt very much if Janet Yellen or the powers that be will ever give up their control of money. And what I'd like to do is see a private money on a global scale that circumvents the U.S. money.
Yeah, and until we get there, we have to have a rule. And the rule is that the money supply in the United States should grow at between 5 and 6% a year. And if it doesn't, the chairman of the Federal Reserve should receive a pink slip.
Okay, well, let me just say this about that, Steve. I think you're right on the thing, but that's not going to happen. The question is as the Yellens and the Powells of this world can screw things up worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, we need to develop a private money as an alternative here to replace them. They're not going to reform no matter how much you say they should. They're just not going to do that.
Art, I have a draft law that would produce a good, sound private money, but I haven't been able to peddle a thing.
Well, send it to me. I'd love to see it. I mean, why not? Let's do it. What is the unit of money that you're proposing?
Gold.
Oh, there you go. We're already on the same page. Paul Volcker and I were the last in 1970 and 1972. Paul Volcker and I were the last two to be pulled over of devaluing the dollar vis-a-vis gold. I mean, it's amazing. But everyone else wanted to get rid of gold, including your hero, by the way, Steve. I just want you to know that your hero was very anti-gold.
Can we hear your proposal, Professor Hanke?
I have a lot of heroes. Bob Mundell was a hero.
No, I meant Milton Friedman. You knew I meant Milton Friedman.
I know who you were talking about. I know who you
How do I do that with the glasses here, David?
Can we just hear your proposal very quickly before we close off, Professor Hanke? Or you want to save that?
The proposal is very, very simple, and that is I propose this particularly to countries that want to de-dollarize and get away from the dollar. They should set up currency boards. The currency boards would issue a local currency. It would be fully backed by gold. It would trade at a fixed exchange rate and be freely convertible into gold. And that local currency would be a clone of gold. And it's very, very easy to do. And it's very attractive, by the way, because gold is not issued by a sovereign. It's not a liability of anyone. So you get away from all this nationalist stuff. Gold is international.
Send it to me, Stephen. I'd love to see it. As far as your description, I agree 100%.
As soon as we turn this interview off, I'm going down my email and sending it to you.
Thank you very much.
Well, we're just about out of time. Final question for the both of you. For the younger people watching this, they're learning from two living legends right now. What advice do you have for the younger people watching this of America or anywhere in the world to prosper into their coming decades? Dr. Laffer, I'll start with you.
Everyone on Earth is younger than I am, and including Professor Hanke, but he's older than almost everyone else.
Yeah, well, we've got 164 years between the two of us.
Exactly, and I've got the majority of those 164 in me. Let me just say, I would say to the young people, don't give up hope. This world is getting better and better all the time. The highest marginal income tax rate in 1944 was 94%. Today, it's 37%. Corporate rate when Kennedy came into office was 52%. Today, it's 21%. I could go on and on, billions of these things. The world is getting better. Doesn't mean we don't have pushback, doesn't mean we don't have problems to solve, but we are making very great progress. And not only don't give up hope, pray for the best and work for the best. And by God, we'll just keep this progress going.
Professor Hanke, do you have any career or life advice?
Yeah. Keep your nose to the grindstone, and Art mentioned a word. It's called work.
Okay. Young people aren't working today enough.
Yeah, well, no, Art and I were brought up in a different era, and you learned that you should be working, and you learned how to work, and not only that, you learned how to really enjoy work. That's why Art and I are still working.
That's why we're still alive.
Well, thank you both, national treasures, both of you. Where can we learn more from your work? Read about, your thoughts. Dr. Laffer, I'll start with you.
I don't know. I've been passed that on to Steve. You guys have to figure that out. I don't even know. I don't even have a computer. I don't do emails.
Art's kind of pervasive. You can get at him a variety of ways. But with me, I think the best thing is my Twitter, at Steve_Hanke. Or send me an email at hanke@jhu.edu, and I'll put you on my distribution list.
Dr. Laffer, you don't have any interest in getting on the social media, spreading your word there?
No, I don't. Let me just show you here. This is my only thing I've got. I have a flip phone. I don't have a computer, and I don't do emails. But other than that, I'm really hip.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a great honor. All right. We'll speak again next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve. It's fun being with you on the show.